Rome has seen many things under its emperors. I have served on the Palatine long enough to know power, intrigue, feigned virtue, and blatant vice. But nothing, not even the excesses of Caligula or the cold cruelty whispered about Livia, prepared us for Valeria Messalina. Her name became a dark legend almost before she died, synonymous with unbridled lust and power wielded with caprice and cruelty. She was beautiful, yes, extraordinarily beautiful, with those intense black eyes and dark curly hair. But beneath that beauty burned an insatiable and dangerous fire. She came into Claudius's life almost a child, barely 15 years old when he was already past 50. Claudius, the lame, the stutterer, the one his own grandmother Livia called an idiot, the forgotten scholar whom no one ever thought would become emperor. Perhaps because of that life of feeling belittled, he fell so completely for the beauty and apparent devotion of that young noblewoman, a descendant of the Messalas, and with ties even to the divine Julius. He believed he saw in her pure love the Roman virtue he so longed for. They married shortly before the Praetorian Guard, after assassinating Caligula, found him trembling behind a curtain and acclaimed him emperor. At first, Messalina played her role perfectly. She was the attentive young wife, pampered her old husband, made him believe she adored him. She gave him 2 children, Octavia and the young Britannicus, thus securing the line of succession and her own position. And Claudius, grateful and in love, laid the world at her feet. He gave her the title of Augusta, although perhaps not formally, and granted her almost unlimited power to satisfy her whims. And oh, did she have whims! Soon the mask of the virtuous wife began to crack. Her love for luxury was excessive, her ambition for money insatiable. She allied herself with the influential freedmen of the court, like the cunning Narcissus at first, and used Claudius's power to confiscate fortunes, sell positions, and twist justice to her liking. The young empress began to act as if Rome were her personal playground. And woe betide anyone who stood in her way, or simply, woe to any woman whose beauty might overshadow hers. Her cruelty towards other women of the imperial family was notorious. She had Julia Livilla, the sister of the late Caligula, killed simply because her beauty bothered her. She falsely accused her of adultery with Seneca the philosopher. Then it was the turn of the other Julia, Tiberius's granddaughter, another beautiful woman of imperial lineage. Messalina had her accused of incest and adultery, and poor Claudius, manipulated, ordered her execution. She tolerated no rivals, not even potential ones. Her cruelty was not limited to women. Important nobles fell due to her intrigues, often because they had dared to reject her advances, or because they possessed something she coveted. I remember the case of Appius Junius Silanus, a respected gentleman, of whom it was said Messalina had been platonically infatuated during her adolescence, but he never paid her any attention. Once empress, she used all her power to bring him back to Rome, force him to marry her own mother, betroth her daughter Octavia to his son, all to keep him close, to show him who was in charge, to force him into her arms. And since he continued to resist, scorned, she concocted a false accusation of conspiracy against Claudius and sent him to his death. That was her way. What Messalina wanted, Messalina got, one way or another. The same happened with Valerius Asiaticus. He rejected her advances, and she accused him of treason and adultery, forcing him to commit suicide so she could take his magnificent gardens. Few dared to say no to her. But her ambition and cruelty paled in the eyes of Rome compared to her lust. The rumors circulating through the city were scandalous, unbelievable. There was talk of orgies in the imperial palace with men and women of the highest nobility, but that was not enough for her. The most shocking thing, what made her the very symbol of depravity, were her supposed nocturnal escapades. It was said that the Empress of Rome, disguised with a blonde wig and simple clothes, would sneak out of the Palatine to go to the brothels of the Suburra, the city's most sordid district. There, posing as a prostitute named Lysiska, she would rent a room and indulge in the basest pleasures with the roughest men, oarsmen, gladiators, dock workers, vigorous men who satisfied an appetite that apparently the Roman nobility could not satiate. It was told that she competed with the most experienced prostitutes, like that Scylla whom she challenged to see who could serve more men in one night. Scylla gave up after 25. Messalina, they said, continued until she surpassed 200 and still wasn't satisfied, an inhuman, almost demonic veracity, and that she would return to the palace at dawn, still imbued with the smell of the brothel, after paying the brothel owner the prostitute's tax. Was all this true? It was what was whispered with horror and fascination throughout Rome. She even tried to eliminate young Lucius Domitius, the future Nero, son of Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was Claudius's niece, and both she and her son were very popular. At some public games, the crowd acclaimed Agrippina and Nero more than Messalina and her son Britannicus. That was enough. Messalina, jealous and seeing a future rivalry, sent assassins to kill the boy while he slept. They say the assassins fled in terror upon seeing a snake or its shed skin on the boy's bed, believing it was an omen or divine protection. Once again, fate seemed to play out in strange ways. But this whole vortex of power, sex, and cruelty had to end, and it ended where it began, because of a man, tired perhaps of her fleeting lovers, or searching for something more. Messalina fell in love. She fell madly in love with the consul Gaius Silius, an attractive, intelligent man as ambitious as she was. She saw in him perhaps the virile and decisive man her husband Claudius never was. It was a torrid, public, scandalous affair. Silius became her official lover. At first he seemed to fear the consequences and wanted to distance himself, but Messalina, obsessed, pursued him, eliminated his supposed rivals, and convinced him to return to her side, promising him everything, even the throne. She forced him to divorce his wife, and then she committed the final act of madness. Taking advantage of Claudius being away from Rome in Ostia, Messalina decided to marry Gaius Silius. Not in secret, but with a public ceremony, a lavish feast in the gardens of Silius's villa. And it wasn't just an adulterous wedding, it was the beginning of a plot. They planned to assassinate Claudius and put Silius on the throne, with the support of some disgruntled senators. It was an act of insane arrogance, a reckless gamble against fate and against the power of the freedmen surrounding Claudius. And it was precisely those freedmen, especially Narcissus, whom Messalina had humiliated in the past for failing to satisfy her in bed, who precipitated her downfall. Fearing they would lose their influence under Silius, they alerted Claudius. They told him everything. The wedding, the plot to kill him. Claudius, as always, reacted first with fear, asking if he was still emperor, but Narcissus spurred him on, took control of the Praetorian Guard, and they returned to Rome at full speed. The news spread like wildfire. The wedding feast dissolved into panic. Messalina tried to intercept Claudius on the road, trusting one last time in her power of seduction, but Narcissus made sure she didn't see him. She was arrested and taken to the gardens of Lucullus, ironically the villa she herself had acquired through the murder of Valerius Asiaticus. The repression was brutal. Silius and the main conspirators were executed immediately. Hundreds of men who appeared on Messalina's lists of lovers were summarily tried and executed. Rome lived through days of terror and purging. Claudius, meanwhile, drowned his sorrow and confusion in wine. He delayed the decision about Messalina. Narcissus and the other freedmen feared he would forgive her if he saw her again. Taking advantage of the emperor's drunkenness, Narcissus had him sign the execution order. He sent a Praetorian tribune and a freedman, Euodus, to carry out the sentence. They found her in the gardens with her mother, Domitia Lepida, perhaps the only one who did not abandon her in the end. Euodus informed her of the sentence and offered her a dagger to commit suicide with honor. But Messalina, the woman who had played with the lives and deaths of so many, lacked the courage to take her own. She screamed, blamed Narcissus, clung to life. Her mother tried to encourage her to die with dignity, But it was useless. The soldiers arrived. The tribune, waiting no longer, ran her through with his sword. When they informed Claudius that his wife had died by his order, they say he asked no questions. He only asked for more wine and sighed. I always believed Messalina was the most virtuous woman in Rome. Perhaps it was the only way his mind could process the enormity of the betrayal and depravity he had had so close in his own bed. Thus died Messalina. At the age of 23, her name was forever etched in history as the archetype of the lewd and cruel empress. Her downfall was as dizzying and scandalous as her life, a disturbing reminder of how beauty, power, and an absolute lack of scruples can combine to create a fascinating and destructive monster.